Now let's turn to what's on tap for today. Discussions on the main stage will explore the dynamic collaboration across all GEOINT sectors and the powerful potential it holds to drive future progress. We'll begin with a timely discussion of one of GEOINT's most essential functions, enabling interoperability. This panel will look at how trusted, shared geospatial intelligence supports situational awareness and across borders and systems, even when opportunity for joint training are limited. Next, we'll hear from our keynote speaker of the day, Kathy Mulligan, who leads national security policy and partnerships at OpenAI. With more than 15 years of experience in senior national security roles across government, academia, and the private sector, she brings a nuanced view of today's most pressing challenges and what it takes to meet them. After that, we'll break for networking. This is your chance to connect with colleagues, spark new ideas, and build the relationships that power progress in our field. When we return, we'll shift focus to artificial intelligence and its growing role in the GEOINT mission. This panel will dive into how next-generation AI is enabling autonomous analysis and accelerating decision-making while also addressing the ethical and operational challenges that come with it. All right. As a reminder, if you would like to submit your questions for our keynote speaker and panelists throughout the day, scan the QR code when you see it on the screen. Alternatively, you can navigate to polev.com/USGIF on your web browser, or text USGIF to 22333 and then submit your question after you receive the prompt to do so. And with that, let's dive into our first session for the day. As the global threat environment grows more complex and data flows multiply, the need to fight off the same map and ensure that various systems can interact smoothly has become paramount. To discuss this topic, we're fortunate to be joined by senior GEOINT leaders from the key U.S. partners in Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Melissa Best, Assistant Secretary of Intelligence and Insights with the Australia Geospatial Intelligence Organization. Brigadier General Eric Vanderberg, Director General, Intelligence Enterprise with the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command. Catherine Davies, Senior UK GEOINT Officer with the UK Strategic Command. And we're grateful to have my good friend, Jeffrey Builta, Senior Executive at NGA, to lead the discussion. As head of the GEOINT Functional Management Directorate, Jeff supports the NGA Director in leading the National System for Geospatial Intelligence and the Allied System for Geospatial Intelligence. Previously, he served in London as the Chief for NGA Europe and Canada, working with partners to maximize GEOINT contribution towards U.S. intelligence and national security requirements. He entered federal service with the Defense Intelligence Agency, woo-hoo, all right, in 1997, and entered or was elevated to the senior ranks in 2008. Please join me in warmly welcoming Jeff and our panelists to the stage.
Well, good morning. Thank you for being here to let us help kick off day 2. We're going to start off with a panel discussion on GEOINT's fundamental role in creating interoperability, both in national level but also international operations. I want to say, first of all, thank you to Johnny for that introduction. Johnny has been a friend and a colleague for many years, so to be up here on stage and get that introduction from him really means a lot. So Johnny, thank you very much. As Johnny said, my role right now is carrying out the functional management roles on behalf of the director of NGA. And I only mention that because I think it's very appropriate that I'm part of this panel and have the honor to lead it. Let me explain a little bit. While the director of NGA has many roles in terms of running the day-to-day operations of NGA, he's also mandated by law, both Title 10 and Title 50, to have another role as well. And that's looking out and beyond NGA to the GEOINT operations that are run throughout the Department of Defense, in the commands and services, and in the interagency, and ensuring the well-being of that enterprise. And the tools in the toolbox, the ways that we do that are numerous. It involves creating the policies needed to make that enterprise cohesive. It has to do with creating the standards, data standards, architectural standards, tradecraft standards that the enterprise needs to use. It's creating governance forums to ensure transparent discussion and deliberation on the biggest issues and challenges that we face. It involves looking out into the future to figure out what those who come after us are really going to need in terms of their capabilities, both from space and on the ground, and then doggedly following that through the requirements and acquisition process on both the defense and the intelligence community side. And there's more, but you get the picture. It is a very big job. The one common thread through all of that is it's about interoperability. And if we can't operate in a team, as a team, if we cannot trust the work, the data, the architecture of those around us, then we're going to have a hard time actually operating as an enterprise. So before we get into the panel, we're going to talk a lot, I think, about the current challenges and opportunities that we have in GEOINT to promote interoperability. But I wanted to take the opportunity to also talk about why is GEOINT that grease in the engine that really promotes that interoperability throughout the system. And so I'm going to posit a couple of things before I turn it over to the panel, and three things. It's not a complete list. It may not even be the best list, but it's the first three things that came to me. And the first one is sort of the tactile and tangible nature of GEOINT. And I go back to even 1962. And the President Kennedy and the Kennedy administration was faced with an existential threat. Now, that's a term we throw around a lot. This was a true existential threat. And to take the actions that could potentially push us even further to the brink of that war, he had to convince the American people and the international community that it was the right thing to do. And what did he use to do that? He used GEOINT because it was, at the time, the best source. But it also gets to that tangible nature, something you can see, something you can feel. So I would say that is inherent in our tradecraft. The second one, I think, is it's just how we've evolved to operate. In today's global security environment, the ability to seamlessly share, integrate, interrogate, and analyze geospatial information across agencies and domains, it's not just an advantage, it's an absolute necessity. GEOINT, with its unique capability to provide a common operating picture, serves as the bedrock for meaningful collaboration and coordinated action on which you can build. You cannot have a common operating picture without geospatial accuracy and precision. If you don't have that, it is not a common operating picture. Finally, third, I think GEOINT is very unique amongst the INTs for another reason, and I think that's another thing that pushes us towards being the engine for interoperability, in that we are part of an INT that had a commercial industry grow up around what had been a very established and very secretive tradecraft. And at that point, we had a decision to make. Not necessarily those of us up on stage, but I bet some of those in the audience here at the time had a decision to make. And the decision was made to embrace that industry. And I think it was the right decision. As I look out here amongst this audience, and not just today, but previous symposiums that we built upon, that clearly was the right decision to make. So during the discussion today, we will probably touch on several aspects of interoperability, data sharing policies and standards and protocols. Our distinguished panel here will share insights on both opportunities and challenges inherent on leveraging GEOINT as a foundation for cohesive, efficient operations across boundaries. Now, before we get into the questions, I would like to turn it over to the panel to give a couple of remarks about themselves. And I would also encourage you, once we get into the question and answer period, if something we say strikes a chord with you, please put those questions forward for us. I'm happy to sit here and ask questions all day, but we'd really like to get to the questions that you all would like to address. So with that, Mel, over to you for introductions.
Thanks, Jeff. Morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Best. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Intelligence at the Australian Geospatial Organisation. So I'm head of GEOINT analysis. We have similar roles as to what Jeff has described there with our responsibilities for defence and across the Australian intelligence community in relation to the provision of GEOINT. For me, I absolutely love coming to this symposium. It is such a rare opportunity to meet with so many great commercial, industry, academic, and obviously government partners. And I'm excited for the discussion today because for Australia, the interoperability piece is front of mind, and certainly for me as head of analysis, something that we're continually striving and driving towards. So I really look forward to your questions on how we're getting after it in the Australian system.
Morning, everyone. Katie Davis, Senior GEOINT Officer at UK Strategic Command. That's one of our 4-star commands within which sits the Defence Intelligence Branch. Defence intelligence empowers decision makers in defence and nationally by providing intelligence assessments and products. Then within that, we have our National Centre for Geospatial Intelligence. They're our national leads for GEOINT and open source, and they help defence understand, plan, navigate, and target. And as Mel said, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Interoperability is key, ensuring that we maintain that. And with the power of GEOINT being that everything happens somewhere, it can play a really powerful role as a communication tool, both internally and externally.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Brigadier General Eric Vandenberg, and it's great to be back here at GEOINT. I've been to a number of these symposiums, and they seem to get better and better every year. I'm honored to represent Canada's Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, but more specifically, the great men and women that work the GEOINT mission every day at the Mapping and Charting Establishment, at the Joint Imagery Centre, and throughout Defence and the Government of Canada. And you know, as my fellow panelists, I too am looking forward to a great panel session this morning. Interoperability is key to everything we do, especially in the international domain. And I think with that, I'll pass it back to Jeff so we can kick it off with some great questions.
Well, okay, Eric, I'm going to take you up on that then, and I'll give the first question to you. How does GEOINT serve as a common language across different intelligence disciplines and operational domains?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for those of you that were not here on Sunday for GEOINT Forward, you missed an amazing panel on the sort of the GEOINT support to all hazards. They left us with the question of, can we fight wildfires from space? And if anyone walked out of that panel not fully convinced that absolutely GEOINT has a role in fighting wildfires, then you missed out on the main point of that panel. It was an amazing panel, but it demonstrated that GEOINT transcends the national security defense barrier into the other disciplines across government and across industry. If we think about what Major General Paul Lynch said yesterday about GEOINT being the best int, he's absolutely correct. And And it's really because, as Robert Cardillo said, it's about the people. It's about their expertise. It's about their dedication to the tradecraft. But if we think about why I think that GeoInt is the glue that actually holds together all the other ints or brings together all the other ints, I mean, it's almost self-evident. It's as Katie said, everything happens somewhere. I mean, that is sort of the premise of GeoInt. But if I look at that from the other ints, whether or not it's SIGINT and a signal emission, or it's HUMINT, and some reporting, everything they're reporting on has a geographic element to it. And what a better way to actually display and explain and tell the story of what those intelligence disciplines are bringing, but through a graphic, through a visualization, through the power of GeoInt. And that sort of takes it to the next step. It's not just about that visualization. GeoInt really empowers the entire intelligence community in their multi-int, their multidisciplinary role. It allows us to bring together those various ints, overlay them in a visual product, but allows us to really get the value added of the various ints, removing the stovepipes, because GeoInt is that powerful that it brings it all together. And I think the example that Jeff said about the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis is an excellent one. Because while the U-2 imagery, the imminent aspect of that crisis was vitally important, and those were the pictures that the public saw, that was the narrative that was spun. There was SIGINT, there was HUMINT, there was various other intelligence disciplines contributing to that story, and it allowed, through the visualization of GeoInt, for that compelling story, for that narrative, being able for the President of the United States to convince the world that this is what was happening in their backyard, and arguably, preventing World War III at the time. But as I said, it's not just about national security. If I think something a little bit closer in terms of the timeline, 2010, devastating earthquake in Haiti, and there was an international humanitarian response. And once again, we saw the power of GeoInt. But not just GeoInt, but GeoInt, how it then allowed us to fuse the human intelligence coming from the NGOs that were on the ground, from the first responders. It allowed us to actually take the data across the various different disciplines, put it together into a visual representation so we knew where we had to deliver the aid. We knew which roads were passable and which ones needed engineer support to remove rubble or to create safe passageways, really demonstrating the power of GeoInt, and in my opinion, showing why GeoInt is absolutely the glue that brings together all of the other ints. It's not just about visualization, it's really about the power that GeoInt has to enable that multidisciplinary intelligence picture. It allows decision makers, it allows commanders, it allows anyone within the realm of GeoInt to tell a compelling story. And I think that is really the power of GeoInt, and why I think it is the glue that holds together all of the other intelligence disciplines, not just for national security, but across all domains. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Either the other panelists want to follow up on anything Eric said?
That was relatively comprehensive, Eric. I'm not sure there'll be much left to say, but I absolutely agree. You've given a really great example there about how we can take it for diffusing a potentially difficult situation to using it through that HADAR concept, which is so important. And as we see changes around climate, et cetera, how important GeoInt is to those disciplines and how it can be applied. So it's a really great summary of where we are today.
Yeah, it's like you wrote it down before.
I know.
And I think for me as well, as you said, it's such a powerful tool that it's really important that it's there and ready in advance of crisis. So if we want to be able to react to the speed of need, we have to make sure that GeoInt is there ready to support and to be that glue that holds the other ints together. And that's something that's particularly relevant for the foundation GeoInt realm as well. That absolutely needs to be prepared in advance. Some of the other disciplines or ints can be slightly more dynamic and sort of be updated or begun during a crisis or during an event, but that GeoInt, to be able to be that glue, just needs to be ready in advance of something happening.
So, Katie, let's talk about that more a little bit on the point I made earlier about commercial, right? So what role does commercial GEOINT play? What's the special sauce it plays in fostering that interoperability, in how we can kind of optimize some of those public-private partnerships? And I'm wondering, especially for international operations, right? What's that role you think it plays?
Yeah, so I think commercial has a really vital role to play. If we want to secure that interoperability, then we need to leverage all the amazing commercial offerings. Through doing so, we can exploit technological advances quicker than perhaps we could alone. It can unlock faster response times. And of course, it increases our resilience and our communal capabilities. And they're all absolutely fundamental, because to be interoperable, we have to be ready. We have to be able to get the information to the people who need it at the time that they need it. And I think another element as well with commercial is that it opens up that avenue for easier communication with the public. So if we can work with commercial companies and entities where there's releasable data, that's a really great tool that we have as defense or national security or as broad government to engage with the public, to educate them, to help portray the message that we want to get across. And I know that UK defence intelligence has certainly made the most of that in terms of the geopolitical situation, and using that as a tool to sort of rebuff claims or sort of, put forward what is the actual messaging. So certainly those are two elements that are really beneficial from leveraging those commercial capabilities. But I will say what I feel we need to continue that benefit and to make sure that all of us are getting the maximum benefit from commercial is comprehensive and robust end-user license agreements.
Yeah.
We need to capture our sharing requirements in those agreements. We need our organizations to think about who will need that GEOINT and how we can share it, and then to capture those in those agreements moving forward. For me, I think if we want to achieve multilateral GEOINT operations, we need to be looking at purchasing data with the intent to share, so that we can make sure our allies and partners are achieving their aims and their missions at the same time that we are.
That's a good point. I mean, we have a very sort of static, formal process, right, in terms of international sharing relationships. But then when you throw something like commercial on, that can make it, or should make it, much more dynamic, I would think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any of the other panelists want to comment on Katie's?
Mel?
Sure. Well, I love commercial, and I'm not just saying that because you're all sitting here. It's a really important piece for AGO, and particularly Department of Defence, for all the reasons that Katie has outlined. I would say for us, sharp focus is on those licensing agreements as well. We've heard through a range of speakers across the 2 days the geopolitical challenges that we're facing, and this is a contested environment, right? The concurrency is certainly higher than what we've seen in previous years, and we really need all the benefit and the commercial and industry ability to come together to really help us articulate that picture to the public, but also to help us understand what's going on. And so from our perspective, we've had a big drive at AGO on commercial, a big drive on industry and bringing our partnerships together, and thirdly, through our national defence strategy, really trying to accelerate some of those capabilities, whether that's using academic studies, or we have been working with the Capability Accelerator through the Defence Science and Technology Group as well. So really big lift from the Australian Defence Department on those things, and we're laser focused on the commercial side.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I think from where I sit, I think it's a communication piece. I think we as government, especially in Canada, need to do a better job of articulating our requirements to industry. And I think, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen a defense industrial strategy within Canada. We will release one shortly, and it will articulate what defense's requirements are, how they see that relationship with industry going forward. And I think that's vital, because I think we need to understand what industry can provide, and especially within GEOINT. There's GEOINT, services that are provided, but there's also that entire IT backbone when we start getting into cloud and artificial intelligence, and that's really the domain of industry at this point. I mean, those are our commercial partners that are going to provide us with those technological advancements, and so I think that's where that conversation needs to occur, so we understand what's available, what can we buy, what can we partner with in terms of industry, so that we can move forward.
Great. So I think that may be a partial answer to the next question I'm going to throw to Mel.
Yeah.
So as we get this proliferation of persistence, of systems, of constellations of data, what are the most prominent challenges or pitfalls that could negatively impact the level of interoperability we have internationally now? And the other side of the coin, I guess, would be what are the opportunities?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to slightly manipulate your question because I think the negatives
Sure.
that we're going to point out, Jeff, actually can be positives in the future, particularly if we get after them now. And we've had a lot of discussion around data. A lot of the panels that I've listened to out on the floor out there in the hub, talk about the importance of data. But really our data standards, if we're going to be kind to our future self, we really need to make sure that we are managing those, but managing those and thinking about interoperability first. You would think it is quite easy to get common schemas and ontologies together, and I spend every day trying to work that through with my analysts, because at the very basic operational level, and we want GeoINT to be serviceable at the operational level, that data needs to come through and be readable to the partner that we're giving it to. And so there's a lot of work and effort on the analysis side going into that, the same on the foundation and the hydrographic side, which AGO has responsibilities for as well. So data labeling, if we're going to make any use of AI, and I'm certainly not an AI specialist, Katrina that's coming next can cover that, but from my perspective, data is the one thing that is a positive that can very quickly become a negative. Leading into that, policy, and I love our policy strategic centre partners, but we have to engage with them early. There is no point in developing policy that then doesn't support interoperability with our partners. You can't integrate at the end, and I know we've tried that, and it hasn't worked, so hopefully we're all learning from that. But it's very important to engage in those discussions early. You're talking about licensing agreements. That is a shift in how we purchase and manage contracts for commercials. So those types of discussions are really important now. It is too late in a heightened or a crisis situation to be able to enact those quickly. And then when we talk about integration, it's the system side. If we're building things, and I'm the capability realization manager for our mission systems at AGO, pretty big responsibility from my perspective. It is really about making sure that when I'm building those, I'm thinking about who am I connecting to, what do I need to ingest, how quickly does it need to be moved across different systems, how does the user need to see it. And so for me, that is the number one thing that I'm talking to developers about. How interoperable can you make this system? Because we don't want to end up with a huge system of systems for the sake of not thinking and planning this forward first. But I would say the one thing that carries us through, Jeff, into making these negatives into a positive in the future is our relationships and our partnerships, as you articulated at the start. Mm-hmm. Those analyst-to-analyst relationships, those teams that we build that can help each other through these processes, through lessons learned. We enjoy very good partnerships, like I've said, across international partners and industry that help us go after these problems. And I would say for those of you that are sitting out there that have these ideas that can help us build the interoperability and develop the systems, please come and see me. I'm here for another 2 days. I want to hear all the ideas, because for me, I'm super passionate about the operational product that we produce and being able to develop that for the future set of leaders that come through and take GeoINT through. So that's how I see it, Jeff.
Great, thank you. Any reaction?
Yeah, you touched on some really important points there, and certainly nationally, data management and working out a thoughtful and robust process for that is going to be critical. But then communally as well, I think working through various common data standards and considering the minimum metadata requirements. It may not sound exciting, but they're going to be the fundamentals of how we can continue to work together and not be bogged down by, like you say, the plethora of data. We need to be seizing the opportunities from that data without getting stuck in the volume.
Yeah, I think we've seen a pretty comprehensive answer from both Mel and Katie. So I think I'll just double down that standards are important. We won't have interoperability without standards. But it's not just standards within the geospatial domain itself. we need to make sure that we're looking at the warfighter and the systems that they use day in, day out to make sure that that interoperability is pushed out to them, so that we're having discussions about data standards and data interoperability. It's not just within the intelligence community, but it's within the operator community as well. So I think I'll just wrap up with that. It's a much bigger problem than just the little GeoINT one.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to come back to you, Eric. I love this question. It comes from the audience. It has to do with how you measure success. I can tell you from our point of view, once a year we have to report out to the Department of Defense as well as the DNI herself as to what the state of the GeoINT enterprise is and how do you measure success, right? And as I said, everything under functional management really has a thread towards interoperability and enabling that. So the question is, what does success look like when GeoINT is truly the foundation of interoperability, and how do you measure that? And I will say we struggle with that, right? You can measure it episodically for this operation or this event. You can use metrics like how many standards are in the DoD CIO library now and codified in there. But it is something that we sort of constantly wrestle with, and it seems to be a you know it when you see it sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure we all have our remits to government. We have an annual departmental results framework that we have to, it's a scorecard. How did we do?
Yeah.
And it's challenging because, it's like how many GeoINT reports made it in front of our Chief of the Defense Staff? I mean, okay, that's a metric. I could count that. But is that success? How many decisions were made based on a GeoINT product? Again, something I think I could count. But I think when we start saying what does GeoINT success look like, I agree. It's challenging to actually articulate and put down on paper because in my mind, GeoINT has been a success when the decision maker, whether or not they're a politician, a bureaucrat, they're in uniform, has made a decision because they've had the information they needed. And they're not thinking, was that a GeoINT product, was that a SIGINT product? It was, I got the information I needed, I got it when I needed it, and I could make a decision. There's a bit of responsiveness to that. Like, how do you articulate, how do you quantify responsiveness? How do you quantify understanding your commander's intent to make sure you're giving them the intelligence they need? Or the foundation product. So as Katie said, it's about foundation products as well. Did we have the geospatial data ready for a phase 0 operation or for a humanitarian operation? So there's things that you can count, but it's more, it's not tangible. And so I would say it's, when our senior leaders, our senior decision makers are able to do their jobs, they're able to make decisions, and they're not standing there waiting for a product, that I think we've hit success. How I actually put that into the department results framework, I have no idea. But as long as they're happy with what they're getting and they're making the decisions, and and the analysts are like, yeah, I contributed to that decision, I'm having a great day, I think that's success. So it's not just are the decision makers happy, but is the workforce happy as well? Do they see themselves in the process? So that's where I would sort of see success in terms of the GeoINT mission.
Yeah.
Fair enough. If I were to be a little controversial here, and I don't know if Johnny's still around, but he and I both being former DIA folks, he would probably roll around if I said this, but is it potentially a graying of the ints, right? Because we're in a data-driven world. It doesn't matter what platform it comes with. We're using AI to interrogate that data. Do you see sort of a graying of those ints as we move towards a more interoperable environment? And I throw that out to the group.
I mean, you say graying, but fusion is what really makes GeoINT what it is, right? That's the power. I think you called it secret sauce. That must be an American thing, but that is what brings it together, right? I'm not sure what we'd call it in Australia. Maybe it's the Vegemite on the bread. I don't know.
Marmite.
Yeah. But I think for us, it's that fusion piece, and we're always chasing that. But it's always very difficult to measure impact, but you can to a degree. measure impact by demand, and we don't see the demand for GEOINT reducing. So it is, if anything, and any of those of you that are working in government will probably know, your demand outstrips what you can get after and supply, right? But for me, that's one marker. The other one is, which phases are we involved in? And to me, you want GEOINT at the strategic level, the operational level, and the tactical level. And if we are in those and we're helping decision makers across those three spectrums, that is a measure of success. That is interoperability. Your interoperability with your commands, interoperability with your policymakers and your strategic decision makers, and then you're at that tactical level when they finally go in. And so I think that is a unique thing, and what really brings that excellence is that fusion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the data fusion piece, that's absolutely a phrase I agree with. But it all comes back to, for me, it's that speed and that preparedness, as Eric touched on as well. So if we are continuing to have open and honest conversations with our allies and engaging those commercial offerings, then we are on that pathway to success. And as both my fellow panelists have mentioned, it can be nuanced to try and measure that. But as long as that is continuing and we have that momentum and we are having those conversations, I think we're well on the pathway.
Great, thank you. So I think for all of our organizations, we have this, obviously a mix of military, contractor, civilian. So the question from the audience is, does that make a difference? Is there an optimal mix for sustaining interoperability across your agencies?
Well, I can start if you like, since I'm on this end. So from my perspective, the optimum mix would be double the amount of people, Jeff, that I've currently got. So that would also be optimum.
That's the next question.
Yeah, okay. But on a serious note, the integration of having Australian Defence Force personnel working with my civilian workforce, that is absolutely essential to us understanding how it looks through the eyes of the operator, right? And to effectively participate in exercises or support their understanding of what GEOINT can deliver, you need that integrated workforce. We also get significant benefit from the civilian side and some of our capability developers working with our Australian Defence Force personnel as well, so they can understand from a systems perspective what is possible. And certainly civilian workforce have really done a great job of bridging that gap around what's commercially available as well, and we see a more of a lean into industry on that side as well as we try to solve problems. So for me, it's an essential element of interoperability in the defence environment.
Yeah, and I think, see, the mix, as Mel touched on, is really beneficial, getting those different perspectives. But I would almost tweak that question slightly to be the main thing that I would suggest is it's about empowering our workforce, whatever their background, whatever their role. If we can empower them, they're confident, they're competent to go and make their intelligence assessments or products. And then we can leverage technology to get that into the hands of the warfighter and decision maker. Then that's the ultimate goal, is delivering that understand. And there's a lot of people that will make that happen and a lot of expertise and different skill sets we need. So absolutely a mix is really beneficial.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need military because I think they bring, I should probably say that because as the uniform member on the panel, we bring a unique perspective to what is essentially, when I look across government, so we have a public service that spans all government agencies. We'll have public servants that move between different government agencies. They'll come into defense, they'll go to another defense agency, or sorry, intelligence agency, or to something completely different, like Agriculture Canada. And so we bring that continuity of that connection to the warfighter. It's understanding sort of the operational piece. But the public servants, our civilian workforce, are essential. Because they come with a different viewpoint on things. They provide an excellent challenge function. And they fill roles, where you want to see some continuity, you want to see analysts sort of progress through and become subject matter experts in areas. Because we're not moving them around every 2 years, they get the opportunity, if they so choose, to sort of specialize. And I think that's vitally important that you see that mix. Mm-hmm. And then where we see sort of that specialist workforce requirement. So right now, sort of data scientists, even sort of my project management teams. That's really where I need to leverage, sort of the contracted workforce for either short periods of time engagement or for that specialized expertise that we just haven't developed yet within either the military or the public service. And sort of taking it a step further, and maybe stepping back into that last question about the workforce, but also sort of like we've tackled sort of the delivery of intelligence through integrated mission teams. And I think we're small enough, we don't actually have a GEOINT agency, we have 2 GEOINT units, though hopefully we'll change that in the future. And so when we deliver intelligence, right now the majority of it is through that integrated team. And so it allows us that flexibility because we're not tied to, like in the US, DIA has certain sort of, rules. You're legislated to do certain things within NGA, and so I would say that reduces your flexibility a bit in terms of actually progressing in that integrated space. I think because we don't have those same restrictions, our integrated mission teams have really allowed us to see how we can work those disciplines together, and that's why I also see that mixed workforce, not just military civilian, but mixed workforce in terms of disciplines as well, really giving us that competitive edge when it comes to that final intelligence product.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I really like what you said. It's about empowerment, and Eric, I kind of agree with you. There has to be a mix, but it's probably situationally dependent, right? It probably is not optimized in anyone's, at least I have not seen that, so. Okay, we're going to harken back a little bit to one of our previous conversations on commercial, but I think it's bigger than that. This question from the audience is, what can the Five Eyes do to speed up interoperability with other nations? Is broader licensing of commercial sources an impediment? So I think we sort of addressed the second one already to say, yeah, we thought it was.
Yeah, so I'm happy to leap in, sort of not quite so much on the commercial side, but about that speed element of working together. I will mention disclosure and release, so not just the policy, but the process. So obviously the policy needs to be robust, it needs to align with our national standards. But I think where possible, we should be looking to try and make that reflective and complementary to our partners' policies so that we're working off the same page. And then crucially as well, disclosure and release process. So having a well-understood delegation of authority is something that can, for each little decision, speed it up slightly. So it makes sure that the right person is able and empowered and authorized to make the right decision at the right time. And crucially, those people know that they are authorized to do so. So that is something I would foot stomp slightly, is working together through that process and sort of our national process, but then also how we can help each other and share best practice.
Yeah, look, I think you've answered that beautifully, to be honest, because it does come back to when we're talking about what are negatives about how we're working, but as I said, they can be positives in the future. It really does come around that policy decision-making and having that as robust as possible. But then also comes down to that systems connectivity piece that I was outlining before. So we can do all the great things with the licensing agreements, but if we've got no way to connect, it does make it quite difficult in that space. And that's what I was saying at the start. It's so important if you're thinking integration and interoperability that you're doing that from the policy perspective straight off the bat before you start to actually build the physical system that will do it. How do you see it, Eric?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's 2 points, so I agree completely. Like, yes, we should be buying, when we buy imagery or data, we should be making sure that we've thought through the licensing to make sure that we can share it as widely as possible. The challenge, of course, is knowing who you want to share with when you buy, which leads into my second point is, right now we have various, each nation does it differently, but we have some sort of a foreign disclosure and release process, which is done at the time of sharing. Which is slow, which is an impediment to sharing. If we actually move that to the beginning of the process, and we actually tag the data when it was created or when it was acquired, so we would know when it's time to share that I can share that data. And therefore, we've already gone through that release or disclosure process, and therefore that expedites sharing. So you can actually share at the time of the crisis, and you're not then waiting on a decision. So I think we can flip the way that policy actually views the whole release and disclosure process, so that we can move it, especially as we move into sort of that zero trust data enabled environment. so that we understand, much earlier in the process what can or cannot be released.
Well, we are at under 5 minutes now, and I am not going to be the only panel that we have these 3 days to not mention AI, so we'll go ahead and mention it very quickly, right? Certainly, in terms of interoperability, the potential of AI is great, and sort of going through the data, flattening it, and getting it to wherever it needs to be. That said, we know we have some breaking of rocks to do. We have to think about things like data tagging standards and certification of models, et cetera. And that's, at this point, a very national discussion. So I'd like you all to maybe talk for a couple of minutes on what do you see as the potential and some of the challenges with AI specific to interoperability amongst the Five Eyes.
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging. I'm always looking for ways to speed up the workflow, right? The faster that we can operate, the faster we can move on to the next issue. From my perspective, you covered a lot of the standards and those components, but education's a big piece if we're going to carry this forward. And I think certainly at AGO, we are moving at a relatively rapid pace on how to do this and building our governance processes as well while we move through this, which is the other essential part of it. I don't think it's an easy road to travel, and I think it's one of those areas where we've got to be comfortable with failure, but we need to be doing it in an environment where we can do that, and that's been a big part of the innovation piece at AGO, is creating that space for that so we can try and work different things. To me, it's the key to interoperability in the future, to managing the data deluge that we will have. But without the appropriate standards in place, it won't matter how good the AI is. We will just struggle to execute it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that does come back to standards. I completely agree. I will also just hop back to disclosure and release, and potentially machine learning automation is an area where that could speed up the process. If we're able to leverage technology to train it, our national rules and regulations about sharing, perhaps with the deluge of data, there'll be more sharing requests, and maybe then we could use that machine learning to try and make at least initial assessments on sharing requests. And then that would enable us to share more quickly with partners and drive towards that better interoperability.
Yeah, I think AI is presenting us with an opportunity that we have not seen. It will get us to that holy grail of automated feature extraction in seconds. As we sort of kick off a new mission area, running through a process that is manual, takes days or weeks. With an AI-enabled work process, within hours or days, you can have 2D and 3D data of an entire sort of mission area produced, really enhancing what you have in terms of foundation data. And then if we look at the analytical side, just going through and applying artificial intelligence technologies just to data parsing, highlighting what's important, doing the simple things, such as highlighting features, counting features, doing change detection. So I think the world is your oyster when it comes to how AI can, partnered with things like cloud technologies and the zero data sort of environments, really change the way that the workforce operates in the sort of the future AI environment. Of course, that runs up against and those were brought up, to our current policies. And I would say current culture as well at time as well. So there's definitely a shift required in terms of the culture of using artificial intelligence. And we're seeing these small shifts. Our Prime Minister announced his cabinet just last week, and for the very first time, we have a Minister of Artificial Intelligence. So we're really, really excited to see how that sort of transforms government and the way that we view AI. So that partnered with innovation and sort of our research and development folks, really moving things forward. But of course, without a change in culture or a change in policy, we will be held back from the what will be, the future of AI. It's the way I see it anyways.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, we are about at time. So I will say I consider this panel a huge success because we generated a lot of interest and so many questions, and an utter failure because we only got to a couple of them. But I will say the panel is here today and tomorrow, and so please approach us with these questions if you see us out in the hall. So thank you very much, and we'll see you out there.
Thank you.